I will explain the process from the Russo-Japanese War to the Pacific War. This time I will explain the Sino-Japanese War. The Manchurian Incident, led by the Kanto Army duo of Kanji Ishihara and Seishiro Itagaki, resulted in the founding of the puppet state of Manchukuo in the Manchurian region in 1932. This country was a puppet state of Japan, with Puyi, the last emperor of the Qing dynasty, as its emperor. In response to this, the Kuomintang of the Republic of China, led by Chiang Kai-shek, adopted a de facto policy of tacit approval. Let us now explain the situation of the Republic of China at the time. In the 1920s, Chiang Kai-shek, who followed Sun Yat-sen, was constantly engaged in a power struggle with the warlords in northern China, represented by Zhang Zuolin. These battles were known as the Northern Expedition. In the same 1920s, the Chinese Communist Party was born under the influence of Marxism. In 1924, the Kuomintang of Chiang Kai-shek and the Chinese Communist Party formed the First United Front in order to overthrow their common enemy, the warlords and the Beijing government. However, when Chiang Kai-shek's Northern Expedition was successful and he established the Kuomintang government in Nanjing in 1927, he staged a coup in Shanghai in April of the same year and purged the Communist Party members. This ended the honeymoon period between the two parties, and the First Sino-Communist War began. As a Communist Party member, Mao Zedong was engaged in educational activities in rural areas. Marxism and Leninism were centered on the working class, but in China, the majority of the population was made up of farmers. Mao Zedong believed that the Communist Party could not expand without the support of the farmers. He expanded his power in rural areas deep in the interior, where the Kuomintang government had no influence. This kind of steady work by Mao in remote areas enabled him to win over many Communist Party members. And his power became something that even Chiang Kai-shek could not ignore. From 1930, Chiang Kai-shek had been conducting a large-scale campaign to defeat the Communist Party, and by 1934 he had brought the Communist Party to the brink of destruction. However, in 1936, the Shen Incident occurred, in which Chiang Kai-shek was abducted and imprisoned in Shen by Zhang Zuoliang and others. As a result of this incident, the Kuomintang government gave up on the idea of completely destroying the Communist Party. Let's return to the story here. Wang Ziming, an important figure in the Kuomintang government, argued for tacit approval of Manchukuo. For him, the enemy was the Chinese Communist Party, not Japan. For him, Japan could be considered after the Communist Party had been destroyed. At this time, many of China's leaders had studied in Japan. They likened their own revolution to the Second Meiji Restoration, and while they were wary of Japan's fangs, they probably thought there was room for discussion. Meanwhile, the Chinese Communist Party called for a total war against Japan and continued to gain support from the public. The Communist Party was responsible for a series of terrorist attacks targeting Japanese people, and Japan was at a loss as to how to deal with this. The Kuomintang government also began to make preparations for war against Japan in earnest around 1936. On July 7, 1937, while the Japanese army was conducting a nighttime exercise near the Marco Polo Bridge in Beijing, a live shell was fired, one soldier went missing. And the Japanese army decided that the Chinese side had attacked them, and launched a small-scale attack on the Chinese army. This is the so-called Marco Polo Bridge Incident. The military action involved 100,000 Chinese troops against 5,000 Japanese troops. The Chinese Communist Party immediately called for resistance and organized anti-Japanese volunteer forces in various parts of China. The Nanjing government wanted peace, and the local Japanese troops did not want the war to escalate. Chiang Kai-shek sent more troops to Beijing in case negotiations failed. On July 17, the Japanese army presented a draft ceasefire agreement to the Chinese army. The terms were relatively moderate, calling for an apology from the Chinese army and a withdrawal from Beijing. In addition, Foreign Minister Koki Hirota notified the Chinese side to cease sending troops to Beijing in order to prevent the incident from escalating. However, the Chinese side rejected Hirota's offer. Anti-Japanese sentiment in China was reaching its peak, and it was no longer possible to do as Japan wished. During this time, there were many incidents of Chinese soldiers killing Japanese soldiers, and even Kanji Ishihara, who supported the idea of not expanding the war front, thought that it was necessary to send troops from Japan to China. On July 27, Chiang Kai-shek issued a statement of thorough war against Japan. This statement by Chiang Kai-shek came as a surprise, since many in the Kuomintang government wanted peace with Japan. In response to this situation, Japan came up with a further peace plan. These included: 1. Recognition of Manchukuo. 2. Conclusion of the Japan-China Anti-Comintern Pact. 3. Economic assistance to China. 4. Abolition of extraterritoriality over China. With the exception of the recognition of Manchukuo, the agreement included the abandonment of all the existing Japanese acquisitions in North China since 1933. In August, the Kuomintang government began to prepare for war with Japan. The Japanese government also believed that war with China was imminent and ordered 30,000 Japanese living in China to return home on July 28, and on August 11, Chinese troops in Shanghai launched a machine gun attack against Japanese forces. The Chinese troops in Shanghai had received military training from the German military mission and were the most elite troops in the Chinese army. The Japanese forces were on the defensive based on a policy of non-expansion of the front. The local Japanese forces believed that the Chinese had decided to start a war and asked for more troops. This was the second Shanghai incident. This was an expansion of the front that Japan did not want to see. 2 Japanese divisions were dispatched to conduct a landing operation in Shanghai. The total strength of the Japanese army was 200,000 troops, while the Chinese army numbered 500,000. Japanese casualties were 10,000, while Chinese casualties were 190,000. In the Shanghai incident, Chiang Kai-shek lost all of his elite troops, of which he was very proud. The Japanese government, which hoped to bring the situation under control, was growing impatient at the lack of progress in negotiations between Japan and China. In September 1937, Britain offered to mediate, and Japan put forward a peace plan that made further concessions, but Chiang Kai-shek, who was hoping for international pressure to end the war, was negative about the proposal. In October, Germany stepped in to mediate a peace agreement. From Germany's point of view, they wanted to avoid a situation where Japan's attention was focused on China, and they formed an alliance with the Soviet Union. The terms of the peace agreement included the following: sovereignty over the North China region would be handed over to the nationalist government, the anti-Japanese policy would be suspended, and a Sino-Japanese anti-communist pact would be signed. This peace plan, known as the Trautmann Peace Plan, was a fairly compromising proposal for Japan. However, Chiang Kai-shek also rejected this plan. Chiang Kai-shek said, "If I accept this proposal, a revolution will break out in China, where anti-Japanese sentiment is growing. The Chinese Communist Party will then seize power. There is no way they will make peace with Japan." In November, Shanghai fell completely into Japanese hands. The road to the capital, Nanjing, was also close. Chiang Kai-shek was forced to choose between abandoning Nanjing or defending it to the death. Chiang Kai-shek chose to defend Nanjing to the death. Japan could easily advance on Nanjing, but that was not what they wanted. They asked the Americans to mediate because Japan's peace terms were reasonable. By mid-November, the capture of Nanjing was imminent, and everyone in the Kuomintang government was beginning to feel that the situation would be catastrophic. Many of them also felt that there was no point in going to war if the Kuomintang government was to be entrusted with the North China region. At the stage when the capture of Nanjing was imminent, Chiang Kai-shek was inclined to accept the peace proposal made by Trautmann. On December 2, Chiang Kai-shek informed Trautmann that he would accept the peace terms. However, While Chiang Kai-shek was delaying his reply, the Japanese army had already captured Shanghai and was attacking Nanjing. On December 13, Nanjing finally fell into the hands of the Japanese army. As a result, both the Japanese army and the Japanese government became more aggressive. It is no wonder that they were unable to reach a peace agreement under the previous conditions. The new conditions were that the Japanese military's war expenses be compensated for and that a suitable government be established in the North China region. These conditions were not something that Chiang Kai-shek could accept. With the battle situation such that Nanjing had fallen into the hands of the Japanese military, the majority of the Kuomintang government officials agreed to the peace plan. However, Chiang Kai-shek insisted on a thorough and decisive resistance. The Kuomintang government dragged out the period for accepting the peace proposal to Japan, and the Japanese government terminated negotiations with the Kuomintang government. It was Foreign Minister Kuki Hirota who strongly advocated terminating negotiations with the Chinese side, and it was Lieutenant General Tada, the Deputy Chief of the Imperial Japanese Army General Staff, who strongly urged negotiations. Incidentally, Kuki Hirota was the only civilian to be hanged at the Tokyo trials after the war, when he was held responsible for expanding the Sino-Japanese War. As you can see, at the beginning of the Sino-Japanese War, Japan made peace terms that were quite accommodating. Chiang Kai-shek, under pressure from the wave of criticism against Japan around the world, hoped that he could make peace on better terms, and he missed the chance for peace. The situation in China worsened, and although he accepted the peace proposal, he lost the opportunity due to Japan's growing arrogance. Next time, I will continue to explain about the Sino-Japanese War. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe to our channel and press the like button.